welcome to the very first edition of Delusional Ramblings from a Paranoid American. My name is Jake, and I will be your Paranoid American. The format of this podcast is pretty much just to discuss the conspiracies and esoteric subjects that I find most enjoyable. I thought the best jumping off point for the very first episode would be 9/11. The reason I chose 9/11 is because that happened when I was about 19 years old. I was still in college at the time, so definitely in my formidable years in development and understanding how the world truly works. So when that all took place, needless to say, like many Americans, it kind of rocked my world. And, just like every American has a story, the previous generation, where they were when JFK got shot, obviously everybody in my generation has that for where they were on 9/11, and everybody basically that was alive during that time. I remember the morning of 9/11. It's actually kind of funny because I remember I was in the shower getting ready for school, and I just was thinking to myself, oddly enough, thinking very hard, in fact, about how I just wish something would change. Something would be different. Just something out of the ordinary. I was just kind of sick of the mundane day-to-day struggle. I was just craving for something to change. And oddly enough, I get out of the shower, turn on the TV, everywhere, every channel. Plane hits the tower. And I'm just sitting there like, whoa. I wasn't asking for this kind of change. I guess it kind of brings back the whole old saying, be careful what you wish for, you just might get it. So, needless to say, just going with my day, just thinking it's just random accident, obviously, because I think it was after both towers got hit is when I turned on the news. So I was just kind of like, this is weird, to where two planes hit both the towers simultaneously. I'm like, that is a little too odd to be pilot error. And then especially when I heard them announce that it was American Airlines and United, I was like, that is a lot of the symbolism of those two airlines being specifically hijacked and flown into those two targets just seemed very odd to me. So obviously I called up my mom when she was at work, and I was kind of like, did you hear about this? And obviously she did, because that news travels pretty quick. And we were just kind of discussing it, and I'm like, this is definitely a terrorist attack. No two ways about it. This could not be an accident whatsoever. And, we just had our, normal conversation, probably like everybody else in America or around the world had at that time, just discussing with their friends and loved ones, the significance of this monumental event that was taking place in front of our eyes. It was just something, it was so hard to grasp and comprehend the complete mindless destruction that was taking place right there. On such a beautiful day, I remember it distinctively. It was one of the most beautiful fall days I can remember, and one of the most horrific and life-changing days for many people across this nation and across the globe. And I remember just going to school and barely being able to focus, concentrate on anything. And then as soon as somebody came into the classroom and was like, oh my God, the tower fell. One of the towers fell. And pretty much all bets are off. School was done. Even the instructors, the professors, the janitorial staff, everybody just was glued to the TV in the community room, just watching all this transpire and unfold, and just trying to grasp what actually took place. And I remember when I was in college, I worked at like a call center that did a lot of stuff for Sprint PCS, like customer service type stuff. And we did some outbound calling for healthcare companies and stuff like that, just to check up on member benefits. And I remember, obviously, because of the tragic events, I was not able to work, because who the hell wants a phone call about healthcare or your cell phone when the most tragic attack on American soil just took place? So I had nothing to do for like an entire week except sit there and watch this and just be immersed in just the mindless tragedy of it, just the gut-wrenching humanity of what took place, and just the evil that transpired that day. And that's really kind of just, not at the exact moment opened my eyes, but it was kind of a seed that was planted. And it just needed a couple years to be watered with some other experiences throughout life until it actually bloomed. And I think one of the moment it bloomed was in 2003. My family and I went to Manhattan for a family vacation. And, after doing all the touristy stuff, we did, the Statue of Liberty, cruised out there. And oh my God, at that time, what a police state fiasco that was, getting through the goddamn security checkpoint, even to get on the ferry to get to the goddamn Statue of Liberty. I mean, being a young guy, pretty radical, just learning all this crazy information about what, Bush really was up to and how corrupt the world actually was. It's very cynical, very revolutionary. And so I'm just sitting there in the line, embarrassing my family, just saying, oh, so we're going to go see the Statue of Liberty. Doesn't seem like we have too much liberty right now. Basically getting strip searched to get on a boat. And of course, everybody's giving me mean mugging looks and stuff like that. And family's just embarrassed, shaking their head like, oh shit, we don't belong to this crazy son of a bitch. And so, we do that, hit up the Statue of Liberty. And then when we come back, we actually go past the giant hole in the ground, which was ground zero. And, we're taking photos, looking around, everything. That was a pretty surreal moment because I'm sitting here listening to the greatest hits of Neil Young just blaring as I'm walking through, just staring at this, just all the ghosts of the people that died in 9/11, even, stirring around with the souls and the ghosts of the Native Americans that were murdered to take this land that eventually we would build the Twin Towers on. All of that just kind of in my head, everything like that. And then all of a sudden, this guy just walks up to me, hands me a flyer, and it just had all of these questions like, why? Why did this happen? What about this? What about that? What about this? I just kind of read it for a little bit, didn't think too much about it. I'm like, that is kind of odd. Put it in my luggage, so on and so forth. Went back home, went on with my day. All my days, the monotony of life, just kept going on with it. And then eventually, I was just kind of weeding through some crap that I had, and I came across that again. And then I actually read it, and it was making a little more sense now that I had a little more political knowledge under my belt from the studying that I had been doing the years prior, in between 9/11 and about 2004-ish is when I really started, picking up the 9/11, truth information and figuring out what truly did happen, or at least trying to figure out what truly did happen. And so I found that, and I actually went to the website, and holy shit, just like Alice in Wonderland, I went down the motherfucking rabbit hole. Oh, it has been a fucking twisted ride. I mean, you start with 9/11 and all the inner things that connect that, and then you get off into other offshoots as to then, well, if this happened with this, then why would that happen with that? And oh my God, there is some crazy shit that you will find if you fall down a YouTube rabbit hole, if you will, as well, for just conspiracies. It's a pretty entertaining night, a great way to kill about 10 hours on a lazy Sunday. But basically, this podcast is going to be just exploring all those different subjects and stuff like that. But, just to get back to, 9/11 as to, how it became my foray into conspiracies, it was a pretty actual mundane book that got me really, really convinced as to what these crazy people on the internet were saying might actually have some validity. My father gave me a book called Charlie Wilson's War. And for those of you out there, they did make a movie with it with Tom Hanks and I think Julia Roberts or some shit like that. Was checking out, the movie was terrible compared to the book. I would definitely read the book. It's a lot more real. They pretty much glossed a lot of shit to make it seem a lot less, evil. Maybe not evil. Evil is probably the bad way to put it. Because as they say, the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I mean, Charlie Wilson did have good intentions in heart. Obviously fucked up and trained Al-Qaeda. Long and short of it. So that's pretty much what the book was describing. Was how Charlie Wilson, Texas congressman, basically did almost like a clandestine mission to equip, fund, and train the Mujahideen, which were the Afghanistan fighters that were fighting the Russians that were invading Afghanistan. So basically, we trained bin Laden. Osama bin Laden, funded, trained by us. The Mujahideen, his Al-Qaeda, which they later were known to become, or Al-Qaeda, if you want to be technical, considering they are just a CIA database of terrorists where they can send anywhere in the world to foment, anger and violence just to destabilize the region so they can go, the globalists can go in there and, run their agenda. But obviously, when I was reading this book, it starting to solidify to me, and I just, so 9/11 was a self-inflicted wound into the very, most subtle aspect that we created a monster which then came back and bit us in the ass. That much at least I knew was definitive, just from reading this book, seeing the facts of what's going on. And then when you start going further down the rabbit hole, and you actually look into, did bin Laden even perpetrate 9/11? Because he never actually admitted it, and the videotape that they claim where he says he kind of admits it, the translation is suspect at best. And so right there, in another huge red flag as to why possibly he didn't even do it or have anything to do with it, was because it wasn't even listed as one of his crimes on his FBI sheet while he was alive. When you go to FBI.gov, when he was alive and he was up on the FBI 10 most wanted list, they had, they list everybody's crimes against the country as to why they're obviously wanted, and 9/11 was not on there. And that's because they had no evidence connecting him with 9/11 whatsoever. So, you get into that, bin Laden probably didn't do it, and most likely the son of a bitch died in December of 2001 from kidney failure. But I'll probably have a whole show about the bin Laden death conspiracy, so stay tuned for that. And even the Pakistani intelligence says that most likely the Israeli Mossad did it. How much can you take Pakistani intelligence for? I don't know. They probably would know, considering they wired Mohammed Atta $100,000 the days before 9/11, which most likely Mohammed Atta picked up from Jack Abramoff's casino in Florida, which probably was used to, launder that money so they could get away with it. So right there you got, kind of a suspect thing that obviously, bin Laden is pretty suspect that if he did it or not. And that doesn't even get into mention the dancing Israelis that were arrested on 9/11 for videotaping it and celebrating it and acting very fucking suspicious like they had a part in it. And obviously they were let go once the powers that be, probably from Israel caught wind of it and sent word through our, ranks that, these guys gotta go because they were there on official business. So they let them go. And these people, these Mossad agents, were actually on a talk show in the Netherlands admitting that they knew it was going to happen. They had foreknown knowledge that this was going to occur. So this was definitely not a surprise attack. Right there, Israel admits it. Not a surprise attack. And they were there to document it. So they, and they were all happy because finally America gets to feel what Israel feels every day. So obviously Mossad had foreknown knowledge about it. There's plenty of websites out there that even say that there was a specific, kind of like instant message program set up for Israelis, and messages were sent out via those instant message platforms telling Israelis that worked in the World Trade Center not to go into work that day because they knew. And there's been plenty of cases where politicians were warning other politicians and members in, the government not to fly on 9/11 because there's obviously something, gonna take place. And then we get to the hijackers. You got the supposed 19 Muslim extremists that with box cutters can hijack a plane and make the greatest national defense system in the world, in the history of the world, stand down and let them just hijack 4 planes and fly them however they fucking please without getting intercepted by any type of fighter jet? How does that happen? Coincidence? Fuck that. If you believe in coincidences, fuck you. That's all I'm going to say. I mean, if you just even look into the lives of the supposed hijackers, 2 of them lived with fucking FBI agents. Right there, giant red flag. That is pretty glaring thing. So definitely the FBI knew who these people were. The FBI knew this was going to take place. Why would they be living with them if they didn't? And out of the 19 hijackers, 7 of them are still alive. Riddle me that. If the government version or conspiracy theory is to be believed, 19 hijackers all died that day. But why are 7 of them alive? And one of them is a fucking pilot, ironically enough. So what you're telling me is I'm supposed to believe the government's conspiracy theory that this all took place the way they said it did. I mean, just getting into that little bit of just Bin Laden and just the hijackers, it becomes real fucking suspect real fucking quick. And obviously the hijackers weren't real Muslims to begin with, so the whole Muslim extremist thing kind of gets shot out the fucking window. Because if you look at any of the testimony, any of the reports about the behavior of this so-called hijackers before 9/11, they were frequenting strip clubs, they were patronizing prostitutes, they were drinking alcohol, they were going to Vegas, they were acting very, very un-Muslim-like. And that just brings me to the next thing of how was NORAD forced to stand down? How didn't the planes intercept these aircraft? And the answer is very simple. Like with every false flag that has ever happened, you have to mask it with a drill. If everybody in the government thinks it's a drill, and then you just make the drill go live, they have nothing they can do to stop it, because they basically think they're watching a video game. And you can even hear the recordings of the air traffic controllers for the military saying, "Ooh, these are some very smart terrorists today. We didn't even get a distress beacon." And that's very friggin' odd as well, is that out of all the planes out there that got hijacked, all 4 of them, none of them, no pilots ever sent out a distress beacon. So this just happened instantly. Where they got hijacked. They had nothing they could do to send out a distress beacon. That to me is pretty fucking suspect as well. So you have this military war game going on, a training exercise that basically has to deal with hijacked planes flying into the same targets that were actually live, real, legit targets. And this mission so happened to take the closest fleet of fighter jets like 100 miles out sea or some ridiculous bullshit like that. So they were so far away from being able to help or even shoot down the plane that supposedly hit the Pentagon. It's a pretty good segue right into the Pentagon issue if we just might as well go there. My big question with the Pentagon is, where the fuck is the plane? You're telling me a 747 is going to fit into a 16-foot hole in the facade of a building without leaving any trace of a fuselage, of a wing, of a tail fin, of a jet engine behind? Bull fucking shit. And they came out and released those, 5 frames that supposedly was going to debunk all conspiracy theorists. You see a couple blurs and a fireball. And under close examination of those photos they released, first off, the date stamp says September 12th, 2001. So first off, it's not even the right day. And if you also do photo analysis of the actual mushroom cloud that, the fireball, I should say, that comes out of the building that is in the photograph, the light and shadow completely go against the way the natural light and shadow is. So it just looks fake from top to bottom. And I mean, you're telling me the most fortified building in our country, the epicenter of our whole multi-billion-dollar defense budget doesn't have anti-air defense systems? That seems like a huge waste of money. If not, they should get that shit installed. And I love how they only have that one security camera, too, to show us that one video. Even though, it's the most secure building, one of the most secure buildings in the world. And if you look at the videos or the pictures, there's pretty much a surveillance camera about every 50 feet along the facade of that building. And I just think it's very, very suspect about where it was hit as well. Because if you think about it, it was hit in the East Wing, which was just days away from being completed their remodel. So if they're completing a remodel job, what was the remodeling job? Well, glad you asked. Because the remodeling job was to basically fireproof and fortify that particular section against just such an attack. So how coincidental that the one place that was just reinforced to withstand that, to prevent, the maximum amount of damage, was hit on that day. And the pilot, who everybody says was a terrible pilot, and he couldn't even fly a freaking Cessna, he supposedly does this aerial move that is, reminiscent of a goddamn Blue Angel, coming down from the sky, spiraling, goes down past an overpass, clips a bunch of light posts, doesn't crash, light posts don't tear the wings off like they usually do. He just comes in perfectly, nails the Pentagon on the East Wing with this maneuver a professional pilot couldn't even pull off, and just... And the plane supposedly hits so hard it disintegrates, that's why there's no traces of it, but yet there's still punctures through obviously the first, the second ring, and then the third ring, there is a giant exit wound, reminiscent of a fucking Tomahawk missile attack. But you're supposed to believe that this soft-nosed 747 punctured 3 rings of the Pentagon without leaving any debris, trace, or anything like that. I mean, take a look on the internet at the photos of the Pentagon before it collapses. Where are the giant holes for the plane, the plane's wings? Where's the giant hole for the tail fin? Where's the 2 giant holes that should be there for these jet engines? And I mean, a jet engine is not a tiny piece of metal. There should be giant holes, or at least the fucking engine there. But none of that's there. I mean, where is the plane? That is the question. And I don't understand why this pilot decided to fly in at this direction when he could have easily just flown right into the roof of the west side, which, if these hijackers are so goddamn sophisticated, they could have done an easy Google search and figured out, guess what, the West Wing is where all the real brass is, like Rummy. Oh, but no. No, they're not going to attack there. Even though all the eyewitnesses say, it wasn't even an airplane that did it. It was a missile. You have tons of military personnel that were on scene at the Pentagon when it blew up that said it smelled like cordite, which is the essential material in a Tomahawk missile. So right there, they said it sounded like and it smelled like a missile attack. And if you think of all the jet fuel that was in that plane was supposed to go across country. And it didn't even go, halfway there. Use half of its fuel. That plane would have created such a fireball. And there'd be more, like the roof isn't even burnt. You can see photos where there's a book lying open on a wood bench right next to the entry hole. If that was a plane that did it, that book would be on fire. Because there'd be how many gallons of jet fuel just right there, burning. And even if there was a plane crash there, a huge definitive, a huge piece of evidence that would tell you that a plane did not crash there is because there was no soil contamination. The federal government would have had to shut that down because there would have been so much soil and underground water supply being tainted by all of that jet fuel. Since that didn't happen, that pretty much tells you that there was no jet fuel. Unless they're just going to let everything die. Some may say that, it's a legitimate point. I can't really disagree, because obviously the global banker, criminal class that has hijacked our country really doesn't give two fucks about it. So I would give you that valid point. And that brings me to the actual towers themselves collapsing on the morning of September 11th. I want to open this section up with a quote from Greg Meeker from the U.S. Geological Survey. Greg goes on and says, there is 6 million square feet of masonry, 5 million square feet of painted surfaces, 7 million square feet of flooring, 600,000 windows, 200 elevators, and everything else inside came down as dust. You tell me, folks, how a kerosene fire could collapse a building, just one building. We're talking 3 buildings on that morning. We got building 1, 2, and 7. All 3 collapse due to fire. You got 200,000 tons of steel that make up one of these towers. And you're telling me that this jet that is filled with jet fuel, which is essentially kerosene, which burnt for less than an hour, created so much structural damage that the floors buckled, they pancaked, and collapsed onto itself at free fall speed. That is the official story, folks. If you think about that logically, how could something pancaking going fall at free fall speed? There's going to be resistance along the way. That did not happen. It looked exactly like the support beams on the bottom cut out completely, all resistance removed, building falls into its footprint, just like a controlled demolition. I mean, you can look back at all of the live morning shows from all the news networks, and everyone there says that it looks just like a controlled explosion. And you even have numerous news reporters on the scene interviewing people, if not themselves, describing what they heard and saw. That there were secondary explosions going off before the buildings collapsed. That was them popping the support beams, ladies and gentlemen, before the whole building collapsed. Because if you look back at the history of high-rise fires throughout the world, they have burnt hotter and they have burnt longer, and none of them have collapsed into their own footprint at free fall speed. What the government is asking you and me and everybody else to believe is that physics ceased to exist on one day, and that day was Tuesday, September 11th, 2001. Every other day, that shit don't happen. They would call you an asshole and an idiot for implying that something like that would happen to a building you work in. The NIST would come out and say, there is no evidence to how this could possibly happen. We have standards. We have protocols. We have laws that ensure buildings live up to codes so they can withstand hurricane force winds. They can withstand an airplane hitting them. And when the World Trade Center was constructed, they were certified to withstand a direct hit from the biggest airplane at the time. And the airplanes haven't gotten that much bigger. And a weird aspect to it is the firefighters themselves admit that they heard explosions. You can listen to them being interviewed. You can even go online and listen to the actual recordings from their communication systems themselves via their, if you just have the Fire Police scanner. People recorded that. You'll have Firefighters saying that they almost have the fires put out on the 80th floor, so-and-so, floor. And then you can also hear where the firefighters are telling you exactly that there's explosions going off on this floor, that floor, this floor, that floor. This is nuts. I can't believe this. You have the janitor who testified that the basement exploded before the first plane even hit. And there's even a recording from a building next to the World Trade Center where this company was running like a conference, and they're actually taking minutes via a tape recorder. And you can hear an explosion, and then a few seconds later, hear the plane hit. So those are two signs that this was definitely a pre-planned attack. And the planes weren't the missiles. The planes were the diversion. The planes were the excuse as to how the building would collapse. And you can see it in the videos. You can see the squibs popping out, poof, puffs of smoke, poof, 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 30, 40 floors before it actually collapses down. It doesn't take a goddamn trained demolitions expert to see that. All you have to do is YouTube controlled demolition and put a side-by-side comparison, and you'd have to be fucking Ray Charles not to understand that, because you'd be blind and dead. Brain dead, that is. So you're telling me that 3 buildings, and I'm not even getting into Building 7, which is the greatest anomaly of them all, but you're telling me these 2 giant skyscrapers that are constructed to basically have hermetically sealed elevator shafts running through the middle of them. So even if the floors did collapse like they say they did, the center should still be standing. All the floors should have fell, yes, and the center should be standing. And a lot of people are out there like, oh, how the fuck can you say that there is explosions? That just happens. And I say to you, research, and please Google the name Dr. Stephen Jones. Because this cat, he's a former professor at BYU. And he actually got some dust sent to him from a resident who lived just blocks from the World Trade Center, whose window was actually blown in when the buildings collapsed. And she saved all the dust she collected that got blown into her apartment. And years down the road, she sent it off to it, and him and his colleagues ran extensive tests on the debris that they, recovered from Ground Zero. And there was actually traces of thermite, nanothermite to be exact. Basically plastic explosives. And you can see video distinctively where there is like a super bright molten waterfall coming out of the building before it collapses. And that is definitely a detonator to cut beams. And even if you see where the buildings collapsed, there are beams that are perfectly cut. Like they were cut with a hot knife through butter, just... And there's no way that naturally could do that without explosives. And you have the distinct evidence that there was explosives found in the debris of 9/11. That is irrefutable. So right there, that is another huge determining factor as to how the government's version of the conspiracy is complete and utter fiction. And that doesn't even include the molten pools of melted metal that were below Ground Zero. They couldn't even put these out. They basically drowned it and made it like a lake. And they still didn't go out. Those pools of molten metal did not go out until December 13th of 2001. You're looking at September, October, November, December. 4 fucking months, people, where this event that happened with kerosene created giant molten pools of melted metal that sat there and just smoldered for 4 months? Come on. That dog don't fucking hunt, as they say. I mean, you would have to be a pretty good slave to buy that story. That's all I'm going to say. NIST has even had to come out and admit that they had no explanation as to how the buildings collapsed. And it'd be super nice to be able to do a true, real investigation and actually test the steel from 9/11 to make sure that there was no explosives there. But conveniently enough, that steel was picked up as quick as possible and shipped overseas to be melted down. Basically probably sold to the lowest fucking bidder. Not the highest, the lowest, just to destroy the evidence. And to me, right there, if you are not willing to take the time and effort to secure a crime scene properly in one of the biggest and most egregious crimes I've ever witnessed in my life, and you're not even going to take the time to secure that and do a full and intense investigation, that to me raises huge red flags as to you already know what the fuck happened. What you're trying to do is prevent anybody else from knowing what the fuck happened. I mean, let's get into like the construction companies that were contracted to do work on the World Trade Center buildings before 9/11. We have Turner Construction, whose CEO is a buddy of, George W. Bush. And his company is contracted to do fireproofing, supposedly, on the floors that were hit by the planes. Each building. He specifically was contracted to fireproof those floors, the ones that were specifically hit. To me, that would say they knew exactly what floors were going to be hit, and that almost brings into the question the whole conspiracy that people I've heard bring up, saying that maybe the planes weren't even commercial aircraft. They could have been remote-controlled military aircraft. I mean, that to me would make sense. Why would you be supposedly fireproofing these particular floors before 9/11 that happened to get hit? Unless you weren't maybe installing, a laser guiding system to make sure that your remote-control planes hit their target. That to me is, pretty good theory, pretty good possibility, considering if you do look at the video of the plane hitting the second tower, you can see a subtle flash right before the nose makes contact with the building. What is that flash? Is it an incendiary device to set off a massive explosion? Is that maybe what they did by fireproofing it? Maybe it's some Orwellian doublespeak where fireproofing is actually making it more flammable. Who knows? But there is a distinct and unmistakable flash that happens not with the second plane, not exclusively. It also happens with the very first plane that hits as well. You can see there's one video of that plane taken by a French documentary crew. And if you zoom in on that video, you can see that there is a flash that does occur before the plane hits the building. So both of the planes, before they hit the buildings, each building, there is a flash right where it is. What is that? Is that a laser? Or is that an explosion to set off incendiary devices to make this explosion more dramatic and epic, so the mindless people below will truly believe that a building will collapse? Because Jesus Christ, did you see that fireball? Fucking thing was huge. But that's the problem with that giant ass fireball, is if you think about it logically, you have X amount of jet fuel and you have this giant fireball. There goes all your jet fuel that supposedly was the culprit for weakening the steel girders on the floors to make it pancake down at free fall speed. So right there, that still doesn't make any sense to me. And then let's get into even the security firm that, ran security for, Dulles Airport. They ran security for the World Trade Center. They ran security for even United Airlines. And this company, you might ask, what is their name? It's called Securicom, or at least it was at the time, called Securicom. Guess who was on the board of directors of this Securicom who did security for the airport that was used in 9/11, one of the airlines that was used in 9/11, and the target of 9/11? Marvin Bush. That's right. George W. Bush's brother was on the board of directors for this security company up until 2000. Because obviously that would have been a little too much of a trail. So if you know you're going to pull this off, you're going to get off the board before it occurs and within some considerable time. So you're not directly connected. But yet it's still pretty fucking fishy if you ask me. Just kind of a side weird coincidence as well, is I'm not sure anybody here is sort of the John P. O'Neill. He was an American counterterrorism expert who worked at the FBI, and he, was basically pushed out late 2001, due to some friction in the FBI because, he started studying in 95, I believe it was. He started studying the roots of the first World Trade Center bombing. And he assisted in the capture of Ramzi Youssef, who was the leader of that plot, and oddly enough, kept in prison, Stillwater, Minnesota, just south of where I'm at right now. And, he pretty much became an Osama bin Laden expert. He investigated the 96 Khobar Tower bombings in Saudi Arabia, the USS Cole bombing in Yemen, and, due to that friction, he was pushed out, and then guess what? August 23rd, 2001, he starts his new job as head of security at the World Trade Center. To me, this is probably a delusional rambling, hence the name of this show. But what I think of that 100% is this dude uncovered the plot, knew what was happening, knew that bin Laden was a CIA operative, double agent, patsy, gonna be used to blame this attack on, knew it was an inside job, spoke out about it, tried to get something done, was pushed out, given a job at the World Trade Center so he could subsequently be killed. And so nobody then would have the gravitas and authority and basically credentials to speak out and say, no, bin Laden didn't do this. And I know how. And I know why, because I'm the preeminent bin Laden scholar. So right there, to me, that is just kind of an interesting side note that I think is kind of a crazy coincidence when it comes to the World Trade Center towers, being exploded basically on purpose is what my summation is. And so that obviously would bring us to Building 7. One of the strangest scenarios out there as well, and one that they do not like to talk about because it has the most anomalies and the most evidence that proves this was a foreknown event and executed by some criminal element that has hijacked our government. And the reason I can be as bold as to say that is the building collapsed. A 47-story building collapses without being hit by debris, without being hit by a plane, and just some interior fires. And it also collapses at free fall speed. You can see the roof in the middle sag, and it just falls because there's no resistance. How does that happen? You would have to pulverize everything below. That doesn't happen naturally. That doesn't happen with a random fire. Once again, you can go back and see high-rise structure fires that burn hotter, burn longer, don't collapse. You can even look at the day of 9/11, where they try to tell you physics ceased to exist. And you can even see Building 3 had part of one of the towers fall on it. Split it in twain, yes. But did it collapse into its own footprint? No. So how are you supposed to believe that Building 7 fell due to fire? I mean, the 9/11 omission report, well, they call it the commission report, I call it the omission report, basically goes on record and says nothing, absolutely nothing, about World Trade Center 7. How it collapsed, why it collapsed, anything of the like. The best testimony you can get are from two people that were drug out of World Trade Center 7. And those two gentlemen go by the name of Barry Jennings and Michael Hess. They both describe there being explosions before, during, and after. you can even just Google their names, and they'll have, the Fox 9 or UPN or whatever it was called back then. They did, an interview there talking about the explosions. ABC had an exclusive with Barry Jennings where he talked about there being explosives and his harrowing tale of how him and Michael survived. And right there was explosions. You have eyewitness testimony that there was explosions. And you can even go to a PBS documentary where the owner of the World Trade Center, Larry Silverstein, head of the Silverstein Group, even says on record that he made the call to quote unquote pull it. There's been so much lost life, I didn't want there to be any more, so I told them just to pull it. And so they did. That's almost a fucking verbatim quote from this man. And pull it is basically an industry term in the demolition world to take the building down. So if Larry Silverstein is to be believed in that particular aspect, you're telling me that for a surprise attack that took down 2 buildings, and you were so traumatized by that, you commissioned a highly trained demolitions crew to rig a 47-story building to collapse in its own footprint in under 12 hours. I'm no demolitions expert, but I would imagine it takes more than a day to rig a building to safely collapse in its own footprint. That, maybe I'm just naive as all get out, but to me that seems a little far-fetched. That had to have been pre-planted explosives to be able to do that, because it should take months of proper planning, as well as then actually setting it up, checking it, rechecking it, making sure it works, making sure everything's going to be copacetic, it isn't going to fall into the building next to it and cause even more damage. So obviously they knew this was going to happen. And a huge reason as to why I believe that it was blown up on purpose was because prior to 9/11, the New York City Emergency Command Center was moved into World Trade Center 7. So to me, that says that is the control area to execute these so-called attacks. The criminal elements in our government used that as their command base to set off the explosions in the World Trade Center Tower 1 and 2. At the proper time, they were playing a massive war game. The people involved, I could almost guarantee you, thought it was a drill, thought they were participating in a drill when they were doing this. Then all of a sudden, the fucking drill goes live. This is how they do it. This is how it happens. 7/7 happened that way. Freaking the Boston bombing had a bombing drill going on that day. That's how they mask a false flag. Is they put and that's how they get people to participate in the false flag. Is they say you are going to just pretend to play this war game. That all of a sudden the bomb is real. It's not a fake bomb anymore. The ammunition is real. All of this shit is real. And it's not hard to find criminal elements within the private sector to even do this. So you don't even have to even go to the military to have them pull this off. And there probably were plenty of people in the military that knew this happened and was going to happen. And you can even look at Flight 77. And if you look at it, there's like less than 70 people on that flight. And a majority of them that were on the flight were Lockheed Martin, Raytheon, Boeing, United Airlines. You had this Solicitor General, his wife was on there. Was it Barbara Olson? She was on there. And they're the ones that supposedly crashed into the Pentagon. So you have this airplane full of all these people that are members of the military-industrial complex that are essentially sacrificed on 9/11. Why? Was it to get rid of them because they were the ones that had the most knowledge and all the other areas were compartmentalized? Were they even on the flight? Were they systematically murdered before it even happened and that was covered up and they just used that as an excuse to why they were dead and disappeared? Could these people actually have been the whistleblowers? Could these people have had the overarching knowledge and foresight and be maybe the project managers that would manage all these departments and saw the big picture? And you have to eliminate the loose ends. And maybe that's all they were doing, was eliminating the loose ends. And even, let's get back to the eyewitness testimony of Barry Jennings, who goes out, talks frequently about how there was bombs in World Trade Center 7. Oddly enough, Barry Jennings dies of unknown causes. 2 fucking days. 2. Count them. 1, 2. 2 days before a NIST report comes out basically refuting his whole testimony, saying that there were no explosions. Nothing like that. Coincidence? Fuck off. This dude was murdered. So, because he was the only credible witness, and he was the only one with balls to speak out. This Michael Hess, you haven't heard shit from him since the day, because he probably was talked to. Like, hey, listen here, motherfucker. You want your family, your family's family, your future, any future generation to be fucking murdered? You saw what we did to them fuckers on 9/11. You don't think we can't do it to you? You better shut your fucking mouth and just disappear. And he did. Barry Jennings said, fuck you. He was a strong man, a true patriot. He wasn't going to cower and hide in the shadows like these pathetic fucking people. No, he was going to tell the public what had happened, giving them the little bit of knowledge he could provide with a great eyewitness testimony as to there being explosions. And then motherfucker got killed. Seems to be a running theme. And if you actually look into all the mysterious deaths associated with 9/11, they're pretty substantial. And for all the critics that always say, well, how can you keep such a massive secret? Blah, 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 blah. How many whistleblowers have come out and said it? That it was an inside job? Tens of thousands of people on the internet know it's an inside job. You got architects, you have engineers, you have pilots, all coming out for 9/11 Truth saying this is pure and utter fucking bullshit. But yet we're supposed to fucking swallow this stuff like it's gospel? I'm sorry. To me, that is just the biggest lie perpetrated on the American people just to get control, essentially, to control us, to institute the Patriot Act and get all of the global tyranny rolling. I mean, even the private investigator that was hired to research the suspicious death of Barry Jennings, the World Trade Center 7 explosive eyewitness, actually came back to the people that hired him and said, after looking into this matter further, I have decided this is a police matter, and I will refund your credit card all the money, and I would please do not contact me about this matter again. That sounds like a scared motherfucker. He probably traced what truly happened to this Barry Jennings, figured out it was some pretty powerful people in some pretty high places with some pretty deep wallets and some pretty cold hearts. So there was no way he was going to continue down that fucking rabbit hole. He ain't like Nick Cage in 8mm. He ain't got that kind of devil-may-care attitude. He's probably got a family to feed and protect and to take care of. He ain't going to put his neck out for some dude who worked in a building that happened to be exploded by the global banking criminal class that is taking over this country. No. And one of my favorite pieces of evidence to definitively prove to everyone out there that 9/11 was a known about event, pre-planned, pre-organized, and it was basically the what am I trying to say? The storyline was cemented and composed before the act even happened. You can read testimony, you can hear interviews with people that were traveling during this event, and they will tell you foreign press was breaking information before the American press because they released the storyline to the foreign press as to what they said the official story was going to be before they released it to the American public. And a great video to prove this point is you have to Google BBC reports WTC7 collapses. You will see a BBC female reporter standing there on a rooftop in Lower Manhattan telling the viewers of BBC that Building 7 has collapsed. Unfortunately for her and her producers, they don't realize that Building 7 is still standing right over her shoulder. So, how could this BBC reporter know that Building 7 is going to collapse when there is absolutely no history of a high-rise building collapsing due to fire, and this building was not hit by a plane, was not hit by a falling tower? So where would she get this in her head that the building collapsed, unless the powers that be already told the foreigners the storyline of this fabricated event that was deadly, really, really deadly. People that died were real, but why they died and who perpetrated it? Complete and utter bullshit. And I suppose the next logical step is to talk about Flight 93 that allegedly crashed in Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The header to that one is Flight 93 in Shanksville? Bullshit. All that was in Shanksville is a giant fucking hole. If you talk to, I shouldn't say talk to you, if you just do research and actually look up the interviews with the coroner, the sheriff, any eyewitness, media, any photographer that was there, especially the day of when they're being interviewed about it, they specifically say that there's nothing fucking there except for a giant hole in the ground and some, carryable size bits of debris. So we're supposed to believe that a plane crashed, but there's absolutely no luggage there, no dead bodies, because I do quote the Shanksville coroner when I say she stopped being a coroner as soon as she arrived on scene because there was no dead bodies. Look it up. She said it. She said it. It's not me making this shit up. She admitted there was no dead bodies. There was no plane that crashed there. Most likely it was shot down. They probably realized they didn't need it to to do any more damage. The psychological damage had been accomplished. Quite fucking successfully, I might add. Their psyop on the American people worked brilliantly. So they obviously didn't need Flight 93. Did Flight 93 even exist is another question. Because there are plenty of reports that you can see on the news the day of 9/11 where the news in Cleveland reported that Flight 93 actually landed at the Cleveland airport to be checked for bombs. So if Flight 93 landed in Cleveland, did they let it just take off again to get hijacked? Or did Flight 93 not actually exist? Or did it just get shot down? Because you can also find a video clip where Donald Rumsfeld, in a speech, says that the plane was shot down. So it's, do you believe the lying Rumsfeld? Do you believe the lying mainstream media, which said that the plane was, landed at the airport in Cleveland because of explosives? Because I think that'd be a huge catastrophic error in fucking security. If Flight 93 legitimately lands in Cleveland, they check it out for bombs, and terrorists, and then let it get back up in the sky just to crash in goddamn Pennsylvania. That would be fucking hilarious. That would just put the cherry on the shit sundae of the incompetence of this administration, the Bush regime. But for me, I just can't buy that. I truly believe that it was just an orchestrated event. What did they do with those people? I have no idea. I'm not the one that said that there was a plane in Shanksville. I'm not the one that said there was a plane at the Pentagon. I'm not the one burdened with this proof to show you what happened to these people, what happened to this plane. I'm not the one that made up this conspiracy theory. I'm the one just asking questions, trying to find the facts as to what truly happened. And if they have nothing to hide, why won't they just be clean? Just like the NSA likes to tell us, American citizens. If you have nothing to hide, why can't I look at all your emails? Why can't I look at all your text messages? Why can't I look at all the metadata on who you call when you call them? If there's nothing to hide, FBI, if there's nothing to hide, CIA, just show us the videotape of the Pentagon. Let me see that fucking plane crash into it, and then I can go off into the sunset as being a nut job, and that would make me feel so much fucking better about myself. Because knowing this truth and seeing the hypocrisy and all the bullshit that is associated with this event, it drives me insane. I just cannot believe people can swallow this pure bullshit. And a lot of people like to ask me, well, why? If it wasn't Al-Qaeda attacking us for our freedoms, who did it? And why would they do it? Who stands to gain from this? And to me, it's a very, very simple equation. You just follow the money. What is that, the number one rule in any investigation? Follow the money. That was at least Deep Throat's fucking motto to the Whitewater, journalist investigators. Follow the money. So let's follow the money. Who stood to gain? The military-industrial complex. Who is a big player in the military-industrial complex? It's a group called the Carlyle Group. They have a lot of subsidiaries that specifically have to do with, rebuilding countries, making bombs, making telecommunications, and all of the like. And who is on the board of directors on September 11th, 2001 for the Carlyle Group? George H.W. Bush, the CIA fucking spook himself. And who was he meeting with in New York on September 11th, 2001? Oh, he was meeting with members of the Bin Laden family, because the Bin Ladens are also investors in the Carlyle Group. So, Osama bin Laden supposedly attacks us, and then his family stands to gain billions off of the war effort to essentially kill their sibling. Either that is the grandest Shakespearean tale I've ever heard, or complete and utter patsy bullshit. And it's pretty good evidence out there that Osama bin Laden was a patsy, considering it was reported on the BBC that in, July 4th? Independence Day, I believe, 2001, members of American intelligence actually visited Osama bin Laden while he was getting kidney dialysis in a hospital in the United Arab Emirates. So, America's most wanted criminal is on kidney dialysis being visited by the FBI, CIA. Odd. But also a very convenient fact. It is perfect in an Orwellian sense, because you have this boogeyman that attacks your country, and then he legitimately dies, but you don't tell anybody that he has died. So you basically have, like I said, the boogeyman. You have your Emmanuel Goldstein, so you can throw him up right before every election, and every time you need a little morale boost, and have your 3 minutes of hate, just like 1984. But then, conveniently enough, once, bin Laden kind of became passé, he's so, last decade, so then, Mr. Obama had to go out and just say he killed him. And that reeks to high heaven with the whole disposing of his body in the sea, no pictures, no evidence that you actually killed him. But that's a subject for a whole nother podcast. And so basically you got your Emmanuel Goldstein figure that was created with this, Osama bin Laden, who died of kidney dialysis most likely in December of 2001. And who else had to gain by this? Obviously, the global banking elite, because there's many reports out there that there is a huge cache of gold being stored in vaults under the World Trade Center that, luckily got hijacked, I guess, got cleared out before the buildings collapsed. So that gold's safe, most likely in the Bank of England. Did we really get our independence from England? Who knows? Who knows? Bank of England controls the Federal Reserve, which in turn controls us. So, did we really get independence? I don't know. Beside the point. And obviously with the Patriot Act, a huge, huge tool for the global banking elite that have corrupted and stolen our government to take away our freedoms that our forefathers had established for us, and that many of our generation soldiers have fought to uphold and to keep. And many not even soldiers, just activists and patriots alike, have struggled to keep these freedoms. These freedoms are not going to be very conducive to the New World Order. So obviously America has to fall. And what they're doing is they attacked us so then they can use our military might to impose their New World Order. And as soon as that is in place, they will implode us just like they've imploded every other country. Do not get that fucking twisted. And all you people out there in the military and in law enforcement, you're going to be asked to shoot at American citizens. Are you going to be prepared for that? Look deep within yourselves. Are you going to be prepared with that? And beyond the Carlyle Group and the military-industrial complex that is profiting hand over fist with these two illegitimate wars that were spun off of this bullshit false flag attack that was supposedly done by 19 hijackers, 7 of which are still alive, but they're Afghanistan's. No, they're Iraqis. It's very, very Orwellian. Like, we've always been at war with East Asia. And then let's get into the Silverstein group as well. This is a very, very suspicious story as to who benefits from this tragedy, and definitely Larry Silverstein is a fucking huge person that benefited. He and his group purchased the World Trade Center 6 months before 9/11 for $3.2 million or some ridiculous shit like that, or billion. And then they basically only had to put down $200 million, I think, of actual cash. I think the lease was for $3.2 billion that the group went in on. And his investors probably put in $200 million down just to get the lease. So he paid $200 million. And then this building had so many issues, asbestos. It had hundreds of millions of dollars of repairs that needed to be done. So this shrewd businessman dumps $3.2 billion of his company's money into a shit building that is going to basically be a money trap. That doesn't make very good business sense. But then if you think about it, 6 months later, it was going to be demolished. And then you can collect the insurance on it. And since it's a terrorist attack, it pays out triple. And this slimy motherfucker actually went to court to try to claim that each tower falling was a separate insurance incident so he could get paid twice on the same claim. And if you and me try to do that with something as simple as, like the roof on our fucking house, like, oh, my roof got damaged in this storm, and then the next night, my siding got damaged in this storm, so can I collect twice? They'd laugh at you and probably accuse you of insurance fraud. But this son of a bitch took it all the way to the federal courts, and a federal jury actually awarded him, saying for insurance purposes, those were two separate incidences. So this son of a bitch, who paid less than like $200 million out of his own pocket to get a lease to this property, will end up making $4.6 billion off of the insurance claim. You're telling me that is not a huge incentive to go along with a plan like this? Trust me, he is not a Boy Scout. You do not get to the top like that. You do not make that kind of money by being a good person and, contributing to UNICEF every Christmas. Not fucking happening. And I just want to make it abundantly clear, I don't think the government did this. The Bush administration didn't do this. These are puppets. These are mouthpieces for the true people that rule this globe. And like I've said it numerous times throughout this podcast, and I'll probably say it numerous times throughout all of these podcasts, we do not live under a U.S. government that is for the people, by the people. We basically live in a tyranny. We live under the rule of a global banking cartel. And their stronghold is the Federal Reserve. And those criminal elements within our government, and within the Israeli government, and within the Pakistani government, and within the British government, are the ones responsible for what transpired on 9/11. It was a global coup to change the way the world works. Simple as that. End of story. Basically, my only call to action is to question everything, and we need a new investigation into 9/11. What truly transpired, who were the criminal elements that allowed this to happen, and if not just simply allowed it, but who planned and orchestrated it. And until then, we will never, ever get our country back. And with that delusional fucking rant, I am out, everybody.